Class, MASH. By Anutty. Chapter 181, Moonlight. The moon felt like it was closer. Was that something that could happen? She didn't really understand how other planets would work and wasn't sure if she should feel worried or not. It certainly seemed dangerous, but then again, it might just be a common occurrence. The thread she saw connecting herself to the moon was even more frightening than seeing something that enormous slowly close in on you. Just as Jill was contemplating what to do next, another puppet jumped out at her. This one she saw fully. It had formed from one of the trees and lashed out at her, all in one motion. She teleported away easily and watched as more puppets started emerging from the trees. Quickly turning, she started running again. The music was still there too, despite how far away from the source she moved. Something was wrong. There shouldn't be dungeons like this one. One that was designed to be so unfair. A single touch from the puppets was all it would take, and she knew that no one else would have been able to survive as long as she had. Mash and Luke would have been completely hopeless. Although she didn't really know how Red's magic would affect the situation. She could turn her body to blood, and Jill didn't know if the puppets would be able to change that into wood. Thinking about that, she grew increasingly worried. This dungeon would be impossible for Mash and Luke. She felt the fear seep in. Imagining her friends dying, without anyone ever knowing how, was more frightening than seeing herself die repeatedly. She pushed the thoughts out of her mind, focusing on keeping her mind focused on the task at hand. The system she had formed to fight through the horrifying images would fall apart if she started worrying about the others. She could embrace her visions of herself but couldn't help but imagine her friends in the same situations. Their death worried her more than her own. As she learned more about her abilities, she started having recurring nightmares. Plenty of them had contained visions of her death, but many more had the opposite. She had this surreal fear that she would be alive alone. That everyone else would die and leave her alone. For a long time, she had felt like she was falling behind the others. Recently, it had been the opposite. She was scared of getting more power, but she knew that she couldn't avoid it. The others would pursue it, and the only way she could protect them was by doing the same. They had stuck with her, helped her clear her family's debt, and even got them a formal pardon. She owed them for everything she had now, for the freedom she was able to enjoy. Her friends had seen her nonsensical and apathetic attitude. She knew that they assumed that she was becoming arrogant and was going to make a careless mistake. They were wrong though. She needed to act like that. To embrace dangerous situations and embrace the images of her own death. To see it and react accordingly. It was her way of fighting, of protecting the others. She grimaced, dodging another puppet as another image flashed into her mind. Taking the trial was a stupid plan. They should have just hunted down a criminal or something. At least that way she wouldn't need to worry about them so much. If she finished her trial, she might get a better teleport. Could she get something that would let her go to her friends? Her determination to complete the dungeon increased and she glanced up towards the moon again. Her initial instincts had been to remain on the ground, but she needed something to change if she hoped to finish the trial soon. She let her wings sprout from her back and lifted off the ground. She had cut holes into her clothes to allow for her wings. Honestly, the fact that Mash hadn't thought about that was just like him. He never seemed to consider the smaller details, only ever focusing on whatever was immediately in front of him. Although that did make him stupidly honest and easy to read, and she liked that about him. As her wings picked up the wind, she teleported up into the air. Once she was floating in the air, she glanced down, to look at the entire forest. She saw no end to it no matter how far she looked. The moon still hung overhead, but her focus was drawn to the skies themselves. It was colder up in the air and there was a wind that she hadn't felt while on the ground. She spotted some clouds in the distance, but the majority of the skies were empty. There was some movement to her right. A group of birds was flying around, dozens of them moving towards her in a swarm. It took her a second to process what she was looking at. They were not simple birds. The creatures looked more like fish than birds. They were slightly round with scales instead of feathers. Large fins seemed to act as wings for them to fly. None of that bothered her much. It was the strange teeth she noticed that truly disturbed her. They looked like human teeth. The distinct contrast made for one of the most revolting creatures she had ever seen. As the monsters closed the distance, she simply waited for them to arrive. She wanted to get a vision, to see how the strange creatures would attack. Her skill was most valuable for gathering information, and she braced herself for the images. Even though no one was around, she forced herself to smile. The image was simple: the fish would swarm her, taking bites out of her like a pack of hounds. They were the size for it too. Even the smallest of the fish was as big as her arm. She teleported again, dodging to the right as a group of fishes swarmed over where she had been standing. She raised her palm towards the group and warped the space around them. The skill was supposed to give her full control of space now, but she just didn't understand how it worked. Space was too far beyond her understanding, and her attempts to alter it usually resulted in an explosion. The group of fishes exploded, blood and pieces of fish sprayed over the forest below. It looked like she had made a mistake. In the distance, she saw clouds approaching her. At least she had thought they were clouds initially. Now she recognized what she was looking at. The white, somewhat reflective scales had become recognizable. It looked like an endless wave of the fish-like monsters. She had no doubts that she wouldn't have the mana needed to fight something like that. She could head back down to the puppets, but all that would do was buy her some time. She could dodge the puppets endlessly, but that probably wouldn't help her complete the trial. She looked up at the moon again. Her resolve slowly becoming firmer as she noticed the thread tying her to it. She didn't know what to expect up there, but it was better than fighting a forest of puppets, or an ocean of manfish. Her mouth felt dry as she took a deep breath. She knew that air grew less plentiful the higher up one went, and she wanted to make sure she had as much as she could carry. Then she attempted to teleport to the moon. It failed. She moved higher up, but the moon was still a good distance away. Trying again, she tried using her mana to strengthen the teleport. While she hadn't had the same mana control as Luke or Mash, she had used her teleportation skill often. Such frivolous use of the skill let her gain some understanding of how it worked. She was able to feel how her mana reacted to the teleport. This time something different happened, and she felt like something had collided with her. Rather, she was bounced back as if the moon had pushed her back down. Was there a barrier around the moon? Her mind raced with the possibilities, but ultimately, she decided to just try and smash through it. Once again, she held her hand towards the moon. The skill was supposed to let her manipulate space, not just cause it to explode. She should be able to make a path through the barrier. Rather than an instantaneous burst, she used the skill continuously. Unlike Mash, she didn't have a way to sense the barrier like his domain and just had to keep trying to teleport through it. Even while using her skill, she tried to force the teleport. Then she heard something crack, and her eyes went wide as the moon itself broke apart. Cracks spread from she had been targeting her spell until the moon looked like a broken plate. A second later the pieces started falling apart, and everything seemed to contort violently. Her eyes quickly swam around the space, and another image flashed into her mind. This one was horrifying. She had seen the whole world collapsed in on itself, the warping of space tearing her body into chunks. She looked up past the cracks to whatever lay beyond. She saw nothing there. It was as if nothing at all existed there, and she teleported into it, desperate to avoid a collapsing world. Her vision blurred, and she realized that it was the very space itself that was blurring. Then she appeared in complete darkness and turned to see the world collapse in on itself. It kept shrinking until nothing remained of it. Her eyes drifted down, and a shiver ran through her spine. All the hairs on her body were standing on end. Had she just destroyed a world? Was that something she could even do? Even more frightening than the image of herself was her abilities. She had known messing with space would be dangerous, but actually destroying a world didn't seem possible. It took her a while to move on from the thought, but she eventually refocused on her situation. She was in complete darkness, though she could hear a strange sound. It reminded her of the sounds she would hear when her mother worked on an item. The slow and repetitive clicks and scratches that only a craftsman would make. Her body started drifting toward the sound automatically. She wondered if she was losing her mind. Her movements were stopped as she ran into something. It had been hard and cold. She ran her hand along the smooth surface and was surprised to feel something metallic. At least, that was what it seemed like. She opened her storage space, grabbing one of the lighting devices her mother had made. It was a simple enough design. It was like a lantern, but she used glass to magnify the light so that it could light up a much greater space. It looked like a glass dome connected to a chain. She grabbed the chain and poured a small amount of mana into it. The item needed a small amount of mana to get started, but it would be able to run on the ambient mana of the environment after that. Jill wondered if it would work in this space but was glad to see the light grow brighter. Eventually, the light grew bright enough that she was able to look around again. The thing she had felt earlier seemed to be a metal bar. Instantly, she understood what she was looking at. It was a cage of some kind, and she could see more bars to her right and left. They were wide enough apart that she could sneak by easily, but she remained frozen as she noticed where the sounds were coming from. She saw someone or something in the distance. It was sitting at a large desk and was completely draped in long robes. The creature's face was covered, but she could identify a feminine body. It reminded her of her grandmother, but that didn't make sense considering the size of those fingers. The creature's hand was easily bigger than Jill's. It could easily crush her with those enormous hands. Jill attempted to cover the light as the monster stirred, but it was too late. The monster had turned, seeming to notice Jill for the first time. Chapter 182, Shifts. Jill P.O.V. There was only one thing that drew Jill's attention, and she felt unable to tear her gaze away from it. The monster had a mostly human body, though it did have 2 additional hands. Although that barely even registered in her mind as she was focused on the creature's eyes. It had 7 of them. 4 on the right side of her head, and 3 on the other. They were stacked atop one another closely, though all were angled upwards. The sight bothered her, but she couldn't take her gaze away. Each of the monster's many eyes was entirely different. One looked as though it was observing the entire world, and another was like fractured glass. Other than the odd eyes, the monster had the face of a wrinkled older woman. Splotches of grey hair poured down from her hood. Fear stopped Jill's movements, and she only stared at the enormous monster. Something was wrong about it, and it twisted her guts in all the wrong ways. Unlike Mash, she wasn't so stupid to try and have a conversation with everything she saw. This creature's completely unfazed expression left her to no doubts. She needed to run, and quickly. Without turning around, she glanced to her side, teleporting outside of the cage. She couldn't really see far in the darkness, and her light had not been enough to illuminate the whole room. As she appeared, the monster's hand appeared in front of her. A vision passed through her mind. She saw herself getting swatted like a bug. The monster was uncaring as she exploded from the light swing of its hand. Even after the vision ended, she only had a fraction of a second to make the teleport. Her instincts kicked in and she appeared a few meters to the right. It was enough to avoid the swinging hand, but only barely. The wind from the swing crashed into her roughly. The force of that alone was enough to move her a little. Sweat fell from her forehead as she teleported again. Another vision had passed, but she managed to get further from the swinging hand this time. This thing was horrifying. Its swings looked casual, like it didn't really care whether or not it really hit her. The situation was more of a game to the monster. Space was bending around her hands, making her slow signs feel unavoidable. Visions passed through her mind as she dodged. In some, half her body gets torn off, in others, she explodes like a squished fruit. In a few, she died even before the hand actually reached her. After dodging a few times, she felt her shirt sticking to her back. She had been sweating buckets, and she was struggling to stay positive. Thankfully, she had enough adrenaline pumping to keep her from ruminating on any of the visions. The next blink gave her a momentary pause, and she used it to try attacking. The space around the creature's eyes shifted for a second but didn't explode as she wanted it to. A cackling noise came from the enormous thing, and Jill realized it was laughing at her. Another vision passed, but this time there was no hand. She simply died, her body twisting in on itself. Jill teleported away. Though the vision chased her, and she did it again. Only single thought raced through her mind in repetition. Get away! 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 She blinked with each thought, trying desperately to find a way out of wherever she was. She teleported continuously, though the visions wouldn't end either. It was getting harder and harder to keep track of her position. At some point, she was just teleporting randomly but never saw a way out of the room. She barely even got to see things around her. A stinging pain spread from her head. The constant teleportation was becoming too difficult. Her mind couldn't handle it, and the pain was quickly growing unbearable. She couldn't stop so long as that vision was still chasing her. Eventually, she couldn't take it anymore, and her next teleport left her dazed. It felt like she had been spinning as fast as she could and suddenly stopped. Everything inside of her felt like it was in the wrong place, and she couldn't focus her sight on anything. The vision didn't end, but she didn't think it was a good idea to teleport again. She couldn't make out her surroundings, teleporting to a bad location would be bad. Instead, she poured all her mana into her defensive items. The spatial armor wrapped her thickly. It didn't last, the space around her warping violently as her defenses collided with the thing's magic. Then she could see as the metal bands on her wrist cracked and the item shattered. Pieces of metal dug into her arm, and the armor winked away. Her mind shut down as she waited to die. Then she felt nothing, and everything went black. Mash P.O.V. Most of the masters had left to warn people and inform the other sects. Gerald stayed with Daniel. They were both curious to see how Mash planned on getting their people out if needed. Although now that he thought about it, Mash didn't actually know how his skill would function either. It sounded like he would just be able to make a portal, but he wasn't entirely sure if others could go through. He didn't worry about it too much and started opening a portal in the space in front of him. He checked his energy usage during the process and watched as the number drained rapidly. Eventually, the portal finished, and it looked almost identical to a dungeon entrance. There was one oddity to it, thought. It had appeared as an archway, a wooden frame had grown from the ground as the portal formed to fill it. The portal itself was a black swirling mass of nothingness, that seemed to be churning endlessly. Mash looked at the archway and saw markings that he didn't recognize. Had the skill imparted the knowledge to him? No, if that was the case, he would know how to read it, right? The skill just worked, and he didn't worry about it too much for the moment. He had wanted to make a portal back to his own world, and it looked like a success. The energy cost was more than he expected. It drained almost half of his energy. It was a lot, and few people would have the mana needed to perform a skill with this kind of requirement. It was unique though, so others wouldn't even be able to get the skill so long as he was alive. I guess I'll see you guys soon. Mash waved toward the two men, before turning away. Although, he was held up as Gerald spoke. He sounded curious, but there was something else in his tone that Mash couldn't place. Perhaps one of us should accompany you? It would be good to learn of your world. Mash thought about it but decided against it. He trusted Daniel to an extent, but not Gerald or the other masters. While he knew that the term master was being used in a different context than he initially assumed, he didn't like the idea of a group of people requiring that others address them that way. It sounded like something a good person wouldn't ever do. You will have the time for that later, I won't really be exploring anything in my world. Plus, I won't be going to any big cities if I can avoid it. Both men seemed confused by the information, and Gerald looked like he wanted to protest. He refrained from speaking and only nodded to Mash. It seemed like the man might have an idea of what Mash was thinking. After the agreement, Mash stepped through the portal. It felt like he was entering another dungeon. The portal's swirling darkness fell upon him, drowning out his vision, before opening again in the middle of a town. He stepped out surprised to be staring down a handful of guards with spears raised. They wore full metal armor, which was surprising considering the relative size of the town. Identify yourself. The guard in front yelled, but Mash was distracted by his surroundings. He had expected the portal to take him out where the dungeon's entrance had been, but this town was pretty unrecognizable. He wondered if the skill had moved him a relative distance to his own movements within the other world, or if it was just a random location. He didn't know and almost opened his storage space to grab his map. Managing to restrain himself for the moment, he decided to deal with the guards first. I'm an adventurer. My name is Mash. Mash spoke while attempting to close the portal behind him. He didn't know exactly how to do it, but he imagined it dissipating, and that seemed to work. The portal responded to his intentions and dissipated, the wooden frame dissolving into nothing. Show me your badge. The guard's voice didn't grow any less hostile, and Mash sighed as he realized this would take longer than he wanted it to. Plus, his badge was in his storage space, and he didn't really want to open it in front of others again. The last time had ended with him getting in serious trouble, and he knew better now. Rather than bothering the guards, Mash let wings sprout from his back. Instead of the cat form, he decided to try replicating the wyvern's wings. It had strange wings, which consisted of a mix of scales and feathers. It appeared, the color shifted so that the scales along the top were black while the feathers on the wings were white. Mash didn't hear what the guard said, as he shot into the air with incredible speed. Far faster than he could manage with his cat form. It might have been faster than even his dragon form. Did that mean that wyverns were creatures of speed? The one he fought had been faster than him, so he guessed that might be true. He wanted to test more with the new form but decided to leave it alone for the moment. He opened his storage space when he went beyond the sight of the guards and pulled out his map. He was close to the dungeon he had entered before. Judging from the direction, it seemed like there was some relation between the distance he traveled in the other world and the location where the portal had led to in this world. That was good, though it didn't seem like it would make his journey any faster. The distance he had traveled in the other world was a lot further than the displacement he experienced in this one. He didn't feel any of his imitations of Priscilla and assumed that his friends were still doing their trials. In the back of his mind, he was worried for the others, but he trusted that they would be fine. His trial hadn't really been about his power, and he thought that the others would have similar ones. Even if they didn't, all three of them were extremely hard to kill. He trusted that they would be fine, but he still worried about them a little. He decided to do what he could and tried contacting his sister. "Hey, Luna, what day is it?" It was the first concern that came to his mind. He wanted to know how much time he had spent. To him, it felt like 2 days, but he knew that it could be different. It took a second to receive his response. "Mash. I was in the middle of something important. It's the 3rd of the 2-end month." He was surprised to realize that some tone had come through the message. In fact, Priscilla had managed to recreate his sister's voice as well. It seemed like she had gotten better since his last attempt at this. The information was only slightly bothersome. It meant that his time in the other world had translated to a little over 2 weeks here. "Sorry, I just got out of my trial. Can you get Arthur? I got some more stuff for him." It took a few seconds for him to receive the response. When he did get, Luna sounded very annoyed, and he wondered what was happening on her end. "Look what you did, now I'm going to get in trouble for messing up." "Fine, I will go and get Arthur." "What happened though, did you advance? Should we be expecting another 1,000 people or something?" Mash found himself relaxing as he began explaining the situation to his sister. Bragging about his advancement, while also telling him of his other experience. He also asked her about how things were going in his world. There was supposed to be an invasion going on here too, but he trusted that his world would be fine. Chapter 183, Suffering. Jill P.O.V. Jill screamed as she woke. Her memories overwhelmed her as she regained consciousness. In a panic, she scanned her surroundings, and images of the creature's attacks seared into her mind. Her blonde hair fell across her face, but she could still see through the gaps. She couldn't move her body, something was holding her arms and legs in place. However, she was free to turn her neck. All of her items and belongings had been removed, and she felt the cold touch of stone on her bare back. It didn't even bother her. Her body felt cold from the presence of the monster looking down at her. All of the monster's eyes were staring at her, and she winced as the otherwise human face grinned at her. She had teased Mash about his horrific eyes, but she didn't think it would ever bother her again. This creature was infinitely more terrifying than Mash, each of its eyes made her skin crawl. The monster's mouth opened slowly, revealing that it had many more teeth than normal. Plus, there was a disturbingly sweet scent that wafted into the air. Its breath made her feel like the monster only ever ate the sweetest foods. The wrinkles on the creature's face bent oddly as it tried to speak. It was clearly speaking words, but none that she could understand. It had stripped her of all of her items, including the translation device. She had no idea what to do. Jill tried to speak, to communicate with the strange being. "Please, I'm sorry. Just tell me what you want." Jill's words sounded pathetic to her, but she would beg if it meant that she could survive. Fear overwhelmed her, and she struggled to keep her words calm. She felt tears start to build up and blinked furiously to stop herself from crying. As the first tear streaked down the side of her face, she couldn't contain her sobs any longer. It was pathetic, and she hated herself for crying like a child. She couldn't stop though, and she continued to beg for her life. "Please spare me. I don't." Her voice broke as she struggled for breath. Every word made her feel worse. Every second that passed let her see how pathetic she was. Something shifted as the monster's expression softened slightly. She was still frightened, but her tears had stopped. Instead, she felt some resolve sinking into her mind, and she started controlling her breath. The sudden change made her realize that the being was controlling her emotions somehow. She couldn't do anything to resist it either. The monster was still grinning, as it reached one of its hands to her. Jill tried to teleport, but nothing happened. She had no mana, the shackles on her wrists and ankles were draining her mana rapidly. They were also stopping her skills too, and she shivered as the monster's bony fingers slowly descended on her. The creature had long nails that Jill hadn't noticed before. Slowly, the monster's finger tapped Jill's head. It was big enough that it covered most of her head. She had to shut her eyes. The finger was cold and hard. It was as if the creature had serious calluses. Its skin hardened from years of repetitive work. The monster's finger stopped on her head. Jill didn't know what to expect, and the pain had caused her to scream. She wasn't able to prepare or block the monster's magic. Its magic seemed to pour into her mind like boiling water, and it felt like her brain was burning. Tears formed again, as the pain grew. Screams quickly filled the space, as she needed to vent her pain. She needed to release it and tried to move her body. Her back slammed against the stone several times as she tried to free herself from the shackles. She couldn't move her head with the monster's finger there, but she tried, nonetheless. Eventually, the pain reached a tipping point, and it felt like her mind broke. She felt disconnected from her body and reality itself. Bubbles of nothingness filled her vision and mind as her mind went blank. Then she was consumed, and everything vanished. Red P.O.V. Red scanned her surroundings, trying to figure out the best way into Crawl. She didn't think she could just walk in anymore. From the information her family had gathered, the only people being let into the city freely were beastmen. Everyone else only ever entered in chains. Then she realized that would probably work for her. She could slightly alter her appearance with her magic and could pay someone to get her into the city. The problem with a city that had recently experienced a revolution was that it would be vulnerable to crime and corruption. People always thought that revolutions left people feeling more unified, but from her experience, she knew that was rarely the case. The military would be more unified, but the common man would be far more desperate to find work and money. Too many resources get wasted in large-scale events like a revolution, and this city was no exception. While the winners slowly siphoned more wealth and food, the majority would grow more desperate. It would be easy to find someone who would be willing to bring her into the city. She looked at her map and saw that she was near River Ridge. It was a village a little to the south of Crawl and was a common place for illegal trade. Finding someone who would take her into the city should be easy. Money wasn't really something she worried about. Missions her family gave her would be funded by them, which essentially meant that she had much gold as she needed. The real problem was figuring out the details for the remainder of the plan. She had been given a lot of information regarding the situation outside of Crawl, but her family knew nothing of the internal politics of the city. Finding Ellis would be hard and assassinating her would be even more difficult. The road made a sharp turn up ahead, and she put the map back into her storage space. Most people in a place like this wouldn't have any valuable magical items. She stored most of hers within her storage space and let the bracelet slip into her body. One of the advantages of having a body that was mostly just blood was that she could easily hide items within it if needed. The mana cost was negligible, and she regained more passively than the skill used. It used more for the bigger change she made, but something like this used very little mana. Almost as if on cue, several people stepped out from the surrounding tree line. She counted 5 of them, 3 men and 2 women. They wore black robes and stared at Red with poorly held contempt. She didn't recognize them but knew that they were bandits. Bandits appearing outside of a city like Crawl wasn't surprising. They would be too focused on internal affairs to do something like patrolling their surroundings. She chastised herself for using her storage items so openly. She should have expected bandits. Seeing their faces, she realized that it didn't really matter. While some of the bandits only looked at her with greed, one of the men clearly wanted something else. The realization made her gag. She considered killing them all but remembered how she had felt after executing that man. Instead, she tried to scare them off. She didn't know if she could attack people without killing them. Her skill said her strikes would impart inevitable death, and she doubted these bandits would have any healers among them. Just go. If you leave now, I will forget that I saw you. Red's voice was cold but revealed some of her conflict. It shook with a mixture of anger and confusion. In her mind, these people deserved to die, and she wouldn't weep for them. However, she still felt wrong for killing the man earlier and wasn't in the mood to do it again. She wasn't really worried about them attacking her either. If these people could actually hurt her, then they wouldn't be acting as common bandits. No, these people were weak, and she knew it. The 5 bandits didn't back down, if anything they seemed to grow more confident. They probably assumed her shaking voice had been caused by fear and that she was attempting to lie to cover it up. One of the men stepped up to speak, his voice twisted by eagerness. I don't think you understand anything, sweetie. We are going to. She didn't let the man finish and jumped towards the group. Blood shot from her hand, small needles piercing the man in several locations. After advancing, she had spent a week and a half at home learning how to best utilize her skills. She hadn't aimed much with her attack, and the needles just spread out in front of her. They spread from her entire body, and none of the bandits had been prepared for the attack. Some raised their arms in defense, others lifting weapons. However, she noticed each of them took at least one hit. Just like that, she knew that the fight would be over. In a single attack, she had consigned all 5 of these people to death. She stopped moving, and simply let out a long breath. Her head slowly raised as she looked up to the sky. The bandits didn't realize what had just happened, and one of them spoke with misguided confidence. "That was it. Did you really think you could hurt us with something like that? We are over level 50, it will take more than a few needles to hurt us." Red didn't bother looking at them. Instead, she just walked forward, planning to pass by the bandits without worry. The man who had spoken swung at her with a long curved blade swinging for her torso. She didn't bother blocking or even trying to stop the attack. She could have easily blocked it by hardening her body, by reinforcing the blood at the location. However, she didn't even need to do that much, and the blade passed through her torso. The bandit's confident face broke as the blade passed through without actually doing anything. The weapon was magical, and the man had obviously used a skill, but it didn't really matter. A physical attack like that was something she could avoid easily. It cost a lot less mana than making blood armor too. The bandit looked shocked, but only had a moment to process what had happened. Her aura of infection had a small range, though it had a potent effect. This bandit had stupidly entered the range, and his skin turned black where her needles had pierced his body. He fell to the ground, a sheen of sweat visible on his forehead as he fell. One of the other bandits screamed, rushing at her in a blind fury. The bandit didn't even make it to her, and Red watched as the bandit fell to her knees. The bandit had daggers in each of her hands. She dropped her weapons, clutching her body as she pleaded. "Please make it stop. I can't, the pain." The bandit's voice trailed off. She was obviously in a lot of pain, and Red noticed tears staining the ground beneath her. Red couldn't do anything though, and her aura was only making the pain worse. It was also exacerbating the negative feelings the bandit was experiencing. Red didn't know what she could do, but she couldn't keep looking at the women. She stepped away, letting the bandit get out of her aura's range. The bandit was able to regain some control of her body, and Red watched in horror as she raised the dagger up to her own neck. The blade passed through quickly, a skill used to send let the blade cut cleanly through her neck. Everything felt like it slowed down as she watched the bandit's head slowly fall to the ground. The other bandits died soon after, and Red was left standing among a group of corpses. Chapter 184, Into Crawl. Red sat in the inn at River Ridge. Some people looked at her oddly, probably because of her age and appearance. A few people would recognize the red hair and clothes and guess that she was a member of the Venfer family. There would be some who could gauge her strength, and she could see those people sitting the furthest away from her. The final group of people looked at her with greed in their eyes, obviously waiting for their opportunity to scam. Nobody approached her, as the person sitting across from her was well known in the city. The person sitting across from her was a beastman who called herself Tilly. Red couldn't know if they were really a beastman or if her orange fox ears and tail were something she gained from a class. In the past, she had believed that any of those features would identify someone as a beastman, but now she knew that people could change physically from classes. Even a person's race could change. It did pose a few questions though. Beastmen were treated poorly by most of the other races. She knew that it was caused by the difference in initial classes and stats a person had. Beastmen tended to have greater physical attributes but couldn't quite match the other races in the mental attributes. Plus, beastmen tended to get classes that were inherently designed for labor. The strongest combat classes they could receive were generally frowned upon or hated like liches. It really wasn't fair to them. "You want to get into Crawl? It will cost you 100 gold. Tilly's voice was breathy and seductive, and her clothes were obviously designed to showcase her body. Most of her stats had probably been put into charisma as well. All of that would only make her better at her job, and Red didn't hesitate to slide her the money. In fact, Red doubled the amount. The gesture would reveal her relative wealth and earn some good favor from Tilly. Tilly probably wasn't her real name, but it didn't really matter to Red. Without checking the amount, Tilly smoothly slid the coin purse into her dress and smiled seductively. Her smile was perfect, and the look she gave Red changed as well. "Perhaps you would be interested in something more long-term? It is rare for me to receive the services of such a kind young girl." The way the fox spoke was filled with innuendo, but Red knew she was speaking very literally. She was going to dismiss it offhandedly but thought about it more carefully. She was planning to set herself apart from her family, and she would need several capable individuals to work for her in that case. However, if she wanted to do that, she would need to set up a house somewhere. The capital was probably the best choice for that. I will consider your invitation again after the job. I will contact you with the details. Care to share your real name now? Red was a little curious, as she re-evaluated the lady in front of her. Initially, Red had judged her to be a basic smuggler or escort, but now she noticed the glint of intelligence in her eyes. The seductive looks and appearance were clearly something she planned specifically, and she was respected enough to stop any of the others from approaching their table. The inn was grimy and filled with people who would be considered criminals in most other cities or towns. Despite the setting and the gruff-looking people, nobody tried to make any passes on Tilly, and few even glanced at her. More people dared to look at Red. Tilly will work for now. Afterward, you can call me anything you want. The way she spoke was impressive, her responses always adhering to her style. Red wondered if it was a skill. Her consistency and eloquence were something that could be explained by skill, though experience could explain it as well. Red didn't push for information, and they moved on to discuss the real plan. It wasn't anything complicated. Tilly would take Red in as a slave. She should be able to enter freely, and Red would cause only a little problem. Apparently, Tilly had a skill that would let her hide the abilities of others. This included faking their level to analysis skills of any kind. It was rare, and Red guessed that she was currently hiding her abilities. The plan went a step further than Red expected and Tilly suggested that she would remain for a little bit. It would bring less suspicion on both of them if they did that. Although, that would require Red to work as a slave for a short time. Red didn't mind and agreed. It would give her the opportunity to learn more about Tilly too. That also explained why the others in the tavern were so apprehensive of the woman. Once the plan was set, they left without wasting any more time. If Red wanted to complete the mission in a few days, it would be a good idea to start soon. Tilly seemed of the same mind and rose from her seat. She indicated for Red to follow. Red found herself listening to the woman as she was led to a slightly worn carriage. It looked like something higher class than an average person, but not quite entering the realm of something a noble would possess. We are going to need to get some new clothes for you. That traveling gear is a bit too nice for a slave. Red looked down at her outfit. She had gotten used to forming her blood clothes into a full set of traveling gear. It comprised of a bodysuit with what looked like leather pads covering most of her body. On top of all of that, there was a loose shirt that reached the middle of her thighs. She didn't think it seemed particularly fancy, but she changed it to be even more rugged. Now all she had on was a partially torn shirt and pants that would be more appropriate on a farmer. Red looked back to Tilly, an eyebrow raised in question. Perfect, now you look wonderfully helpless. The woman seemed like she was enjoying the situation. It felt like she wasn't taking the situation seriously, but she didn't know why Red was trying to infiltrate the city. It didn't really matter though, as Tilly would leave at the same time that Red started her plan. Tilly produced a set of metal manacles and handed them to Red. They seemed to have just appeared in her hand. A storage skill? The shackles gave a slight feel of magic, and Red couldn't just put them on. What are they? It's a slave collar. Simply put one manacle around your wrists and ankles, then put the shackle around your neck. Don't worry, they don't actually work, it's mostly just used for foreplay. Speaking of which, I can make them tighter if you would like. Red didn't respond to the prod at the end, and simply put the item on. Although, she didn't really let the item touch her. She thinned her body where the metal pieces would go and held them in place with thin strands of blood. After evaluating Tilly's reaction, Red guessed that she was being genuine about the item. Red wondered how common slave collars were for Tilly to expect that they would need it. She didn't ask the question though. In the past, it was beastmen who were most often subjected to the device, although half races faced a similar amount of discrimination. The trip began, and only when they got close to the city did she stop trying to adjust her body for the fake slave collar. If it was a trap, Tilly probably would have sprung it already. When nothing happened, she felt confident that the item was indeed a fake. The woman in question sat across from her, and another man drove the carriage. He was a random person, simply there to act as a transport. He wouldn't be entering the city with the two of them. Red was seated so that she could casually look out the window. The enormous gates of the city were ruined. The heavy doors had been something that had impressed her before, but now she saw that they had been destroyed. Large pieces of the door lay on the ground outside of the city. There were a few guards stationed at the entrance. She didn't recognize any of them, though it probably wouldn't matter if she did. Her appearance was very different from when she had last been here, and these people wouldn't recognize her. Once they got to the city gates, they stepped out of the carriage. Tilly had fully changed her aura, and she appeared as a somewhat pompous young lady. Something you would expect from a merchant's daughter. She had even adjusted her clothing to be a bit more appropriate, and it seemed like she had become younger too. She only looked a few years older than Red now. It was impressive. Tilly walked over to the gates, while Red followed behind. She carried a large suitcase that was filled with random articles of clothing. It wasn't heavy for her, but she acted like she was struggling to even carry it. Her back hunched slightly as she pretended to struggle with the weight. As they approached, the guards stopped her. Red noticed that the guards were all wearing matching armor. The last time she was here, the guards had mixed gear, not really conforming to a standard. It seemed like they care a lot more about presentation now. She guessed that Ellis was ruling with a firmer hand than the city's previous leaders. The guards were inspecting everyone that arrived, and their group was no exception. 2 guards approached them, both lowering the visor on their helms to reveal their faces. They had some scars on them that looked brand new. The skin was still a bit red around the wounds. "Identify yourself." Red let Tilly handle the conversation. The woman straightened her back and glared at the approaching knights. It was the gaze that only someone important could manage. She was good at playing her role. "I am Farah. I heard that this place would be a safe haven to all beastmen. Especially those who were well connected." The guard took a step back at the words. He seemed to be considering the validity, but ultimately decided to drop the matter. He probably decided that it was above his purview and that 2 weak-looking women couldn't cause that much problem. The other guard seemed to have something else in mind, and Red noticed the strange look she was getting from the man. "Your slave, how much for her?" The guard was apparently interested in purchasing her. She could guess why, but continued to remain in disguise. Tilly seemed to have something prepared and responded coldly to the guard. "She is not for sale, and you wouldn't want her anyways. She is cursed, sickness constantly plaguing her body. You nor anyone else should try anything, else you fall under the same sickness. She is only good for helping me with more womanly needs." Jill was impressed with Tilly's improvisation, and it did seem to stop the guard in his tracks. The other guard seemed bothered by the other's actions and roughly pulled him back. He looked angry and apologetic when speaking next, obviously trying to get into Tilly's good graces. "I'm sorry for this buffoon. He is new. You are free to enter, there will be several homes you can purchase once you enter." The guard waved for them to enter the city. Tilly walked beside Red, standing between her and the disgusting guard. That was the final thing Red needed to see from the women, to decide that she could probably be trusted enough to establish a longer-term contract. As they stepped into the city, Red heard the nicer guard apologize as she stepped by him. "Sorry." He looked genuinely sympathetic, and she guessed that her sickly appearance was affecting the man. She nodded slightly towards him. Although her mind was elsewhere, the difference between the guards' attitudes probably meant that there were larger disagreements within the city. It clearly hadn't unified very much, but she could have guessed that from the sorry state of the walls. She looked toward the city, remembering her last visit in vivid detail. Chapter 185, Luke's Trial. Luke's vision was swallowed in darkness as he was transported to another world. When he came to, he saw the portal behind him. It was an exit, one he could take if he wanted to take another trial. However, he felt a connection to the place. Something about the area drew his attention, and he looked far into the distance. He was on a grassy plain of some kind. The grass was yellow, almost gold in the light of the sun. The image looked as if it were a painting, the setting sun illuminating in a magical beauty. The stillness of the moment dawned on him, and he found himself just staring at the image. Focused entirely on the setting sun, he watched until the sun descended from view. The sun had a hold on him, and he only felt like he could move once it was gone. As the dark of night ran over the plains, the golden grass seemed to become white. A reflection of the moon itself. All around him, the grass rustled. Something dawned on him as he heard the noises. He didn't feel any wind. Instantly he snapped his head downwards, a little scared of the shadows he saw lurking in the grass. The beauty of the previous moment was gone, and he felt his hair stand on end as shapes began appearing among the grass. The darkness seemed to become deeper and absolute. Instinctively, he tried to call for the others. His voice carried in the emptiness, but no one was around to hear him. It had been a long time since he last had to fight by himself. He relied on their presence and felt a surge of fear pass through him as he realized that he was completely alone. Feeling like he should try another dungeon, he took a step backward, and found his back colliding with something hard. Turning around, he found himself staring at a large castle. A metal door twice as tall as he was stood before him. The castle that housed the doors was even more impressive than the elaborately engraved doors. The door itself told a story, and he could follow the engravings as if it was a page of a book. The first drawing was of a man who fell from a blade in his back. He rose again, finding power and new purpose. Rather than seeking revenge, he saved others by building himself up. Eventually, he became a king, a lord, of those he helped. Those he returned. This castle before him was his, and Luke knew what he was looking at. This was a lich's castle. He considered running away, trying a different trial, but knew that his skills were most suited for dealing with the undead. He couldn't just run from the dungeon because he was afraid. There wouldn't always be people around who could save him, and he needed to get over his fears. They had been bubbling up ever since Red's death against the demons. He brought her back out of fear rather than friendship. Her death had frightened him more because he knew he would have been left alone. It wasn't that he didn't care about her, in fact, he cared about all three of them quite a lot. However, at the time he had been acting on instinct, his base emotions driving him to action. Fear and loneliness had led him to use forbidden magic to bring Red back from the dead. All of those things had made him worried. He knew what class he would probably get from this trial. Despite his intentions, he had brought someone back. Turned Red into an undead. He only knew of one class that could do something like that, and it was something he had a proven affinity for. What would he do if all of his options were lich classes? He couldn't help but worry about it, and trade to shake away the fears. The others wouldn't worry about their class, and he bet that Mash would be eager to get a class that was so strong. For someone who tried to help most people he met, Mash seemed to have no morals when it came to his class selection. Mash was persistent, and Luke noticed his attempts to get him to use his soul-stealing skill more. Mustering up his courage, he made a silent prayer before entering. He brought his hands together, one a fist the other an open palm. Then he slowly raised it to his head. The prayer wasn't directed towards any god, rather it was to those who watched over them. His ancestors were looking upon him and guiding his path. With that, he pushed against the door. It didn't feel as cold as he expected it to and wondered if it was just his nerves. The door was heavier than he expected. He could open it, but most people at his level would struggle with just that. He didn't enter immediately and instead hid at the side of the entranceway. He looked inside, a strange lighting system illuminating the space inside. The light felt weirdly artificial, and he was surprised to see that the building was designed lavishly. There was a long red carpet that led from the entrance to a central staircase. The staircase ran up to a back wall before splitting and heading to an upper floor. The walls were made of stone brick, and it was well kept too. There were doors along the walls on either side of the carpet, and he could even see some rooms on the second floor. There were 2 archways on the ground floor which probably led to other sections of the building. The castle was closer to a mansion, but it was still incredibly large and would have many different sections to it. He still didn't enter immediately and watched to see if anything would happen. After a few minutes passed, he entered. As soon as he stepped inside, he felt a shift in the building. The door shut itself, behind him the loud closing noise making him jump a little. It was stereotypical, but it still got a jump out of him. He was glad that the others weren't there. Despite having skills so heavily related to undead creatures, he still had some fear about them. He blamed his parents for scaring him with stories of liches as a child. Once he was inside, he got a better look at the lights. They were glass spheres on the wall, and they seemed to contain lightning. The light it released was bright, but it felt artificial. It lacked the same warmth of the monocrystals they used back home. This building was cold, and he shivered a little. It had felt warmer outside. He looked over the empty entranceway and waited for something to happen. Nothing moved, the only sound coming from his own breaths. There were easily a dozen doors that he could see, and none looked particularly special. The staircase ascended to a higher section of the building, and he could see that there was another staircase to reach an even higher floor. He decided against checking any of the doors at the moment. It felt like it would be a mistake, and he was a little frightened of something jumping out at him. Logically, he knew that most things would be unable to seriously harm him with his healing. His anxiety was driving him down the path that he could actually see down. The stairs were almost completely visible, and he would be able to see his surroundings, well in advance of something jumping out at him. As he walked up the stairs, he was surprised to hear the creak of wood. The rest of the building was made of stone and metal, so a wooden interior was surprising. There was carpet everywhere too. This building was nicer than Mash's brother's home, although it lacked any art or sculptures. Plus, it didn't really have a garden. However, the golden fields outside were better than any garden could be. The only thing he saw up the stairs was more stairs. Feeling somewhat sure of the fact, he ascended the staircase. The steps grew a little narrower after he passed the second floor, but he could easily climb them. He noticed an opening along with one of the walls. The stairs didn't stop there though. They kept climbing up, turning gently so that it could crawl all the way to the top. At least that was the feeling he got as he climbed them. He peered into each hallway he passed, more doors filling every single one. This building was some kind of mix between mansion and castle and would be able to house dozens of people easily. It seemed empty though, and he wondered what the trial would even be. He just kept climbing the stairs. Eventually, they stopped before a wooden door. One that was far less elaborate than most he had seen on his way. However, the door practically radiated mana, or at least whatever was behind it. Luke guessed that he made the right decision by passing up on the diversions along the way. Part of this dungeon probably involved ignoring meaningless distractions. Searching a house like this would have taken days otherwise. He approached the door and stopped, unconsciously waiting for Mash to tell him what was on the other side. There had been a few instances of him acting like that since entering the dungeon. While he wasn't the most talkative among the group, he was used to their presence and found himself speaking aloud only to remember that he was alone. People like Mash and Jill were probably struggling a lot more with keeping their mouths shut. Thinking about the others worried him. He was the only one with a real healing skill, and Mash especially was the type to get hit. While they joked about Jill's arrogant attitude, Mash was more worrisome. He trusted too much in his durability, and Luke had seen him take more than a few attacks that he could have avoided. Jill was probably the one in the least danger. A creature would basically need to be a god if they wanted to harm her. He placed his palm against the door carefully, waiting for something to happen. When nothing happened, he activated his buffs, seeing if the mana would react to his skill. There was still no response. There was one more thing he could do, and he bent over to try and peek underneath the door. He couldn't see inside though the door actually perfectly fit the entrance. If only he had a domain skill like Mash. Taking a deep breath, he focused his resolve as much as he could. He pushed his buffs to the maximum, the marking appearing on his skin as he gained stats. As another precaution, he preemptively started healing himself. This wasn't something he had done in a long time. The others, Mash especially, were people who did very little preparation. Even Red, for all her experience and intelligence, did most things with complete confidence. She rarely second-guessed her decision, but he knew that would come back to bite her eventually. Jill was the only one who seemed aware of the risks, which he found interesting considering that she was the least likely to ever face any. That was probably just a result of her family's old debts and the fact that she needed to deal with them. It was okay though, no matter what mistakes they made he would be there to patch them up. That thought made him realize that he was delaying for no reason, and he pushed the door open. Chapter 186, Risk. The room was dark, the only light coming from a window on the opposite side of the room. He wondered why this room wasn't using the strange lights as the rest of the house. At the center of the room was a grey glass sphere that was easily as big as his arm. It radiated power like nothing he had ever seen before. The mana it was producing felt like it was brushing against his own. The feeling wasn't bad, or even harmful. Instead, he felt a pull toward it as if it had hooked him somehow. Taking a few slow steps forward, he stopped before the object. It floated above a raised silver pedestal, but he didn't try and grab for it. An item just sitting around like this didn't seem very likely. Considering how strong it felt, he felt even more unsure about the nature of the item. He spent the next several minutes looking around the room, but other than some dust he found nothing. The room was meant to contain the object and nothing more. The colorless grey walls made the floating orb even more imposing, and Luke debated whether he should interact with it or not. On one hand, it was probably related to the trial, but it could be another distraction. He had passed upon hundreds of rooms in his attempt to get here. After a moment of contemplation, he decided to check some of the other rooms first. Although, the door behind him had closed silently enough that he hadn't heard. Pressing his hand against the door he tried to push it open. This door didn't have any handles or locks, but it didn't budge. The door remained shut, regardless of how much force he put behind the push. His buffs didn't seem to make any difference either. He took a few steps away from the door, before kicking out with his leg. Activating his skills, a spectral foot grew around his real one and strengthened his strike significantly. Soul manifestation was better against living opponents, since it got around most defenses and struck their souls directly. However, it did strengthen his attacks a little too. The sound of his foot slamming against the door was satisfying but pointless. It didn't even shake. Honestly, he expected the wall to give out considering the strength behind his strike. The building was far sturdier than it looked. While nice, it seemed old, and he honestly expected to be able to break out if he ran into trouble. This was the backup plan he had made when he decided to enter the building. He stared at the door trying to think of another solution, and he noticed the light again. There had been a window in the room, and he turned around to look at it. The orb had changed, darkening in color slightly. Now it was completely black, but he focused more on the window behind it. There was a glass pane in the way. It would probably be like the rest of the building, but he still wanted to check. He walked around the orb, noticing the color shift to a more neutral gray as he got close to it. When he approached the window, the orb darkened again. Luke just pushed on the window once, not surprised to feel the same firmness as the door. It seemed like he wouldn't be breaking out of the room without at least interacting with the strange orb. Resigned to his fate, he turned on the orb. Its color shifted back to gray as if it were alive. It wasn't impossible. He approached it, gingerly placing his hand against the top of the sphere. His hand didn't cover much of it, but the orb reacted. Its color shifted, the glowing buffs around his arm seeming to mix with the orb. Soon the orb was covered in the same buffs. Luke moved his arm away in a panic, but the orb was stuck to it now. He wanted to curse his poor decisions. He should never have entered the house, and just tried for another trial. The orb was shrinking, and he could feel it mixing with his soul. It seemed to bend oddly as it flowed beneath his skin, reaching the deepest parts of his body. He felt his consciousness strain against something as if the orb was attempting to put him to sleep. He struggled against it, but his magic was failing rapidly. His mana was just acting weirdly, and he couldn't use any of his skills. The skills he had active were slowly disappearing too. His eyes darted around, fear overwhelming his reason. He stepped towards the door, even though he knew that he couldn't open it. He stumbled, black dots appearing at the edges of his vision. His knees crashed to the wooden floor, and he was surprised to feel a stinging pain from them. His stats should have been more than high enough to stop that. His eyes watered from the shock rather than the pain. It had been a while since he last felt a soft stinging pain like this. It distracted him and helped him push back against the lull of the item. In the moment of clarity, he remembered the key. Willing his storage space open, he reached inside and tried to grab the key. It wasn't meant to be, and he fell unconscious a few inches short of the key. Luke opened his eyes, feeling strange. He couldn't understand what had happened, but he felt like he knew what he needed to do. The trial had begun, the absorption of the orb was just one part of it. He felt connected to the house as a whole like it was a part of his soul. He felt like he was able to see wherever he wanted to within the house, though it wasn't automatic like MASH. It felt like when he gained a new skill. Considering that, he checked his status. Name, Lucas. Class, Holy War Soul Cleric. Level, 100. Health, 2100/2100. Stamina, 1500/1500. Mana, 1830/1830. Fortitude, 210. Endurance, 150. Strength, 190. Agility, 175. Intelligence, 183. Wisdom, 264. Charisma, 99. Free stats, 0. Skills, Soul Judgment, Holy Soul Manifestation, Soul Enhancement, Restore Body and Soul, Divine Soul Marks, Corrupt Distortion, Holy Soul Fire, True Holy Soul, One in Mind and Body, Untouchable Spirit, War Cleric's Bond, Hero's Mentality. Soul Judgment, observe and judge the souls around you. In judging the soul of those you vanquish, you take even greater power from those who are deserving of your judgment. You decide the fates of the souls around you. Holy Soul Manifestation, let your soul manifest around you, shaping it and transforming your body to unbelievable power. Define your own limits. Soul enhancement, improve their constitution and strengthen them. The bonus is improved based on your belief in them. Plus 50 to 100%. Restore body and soul, heal people in their entirety. First, restore their soul, and then heal their body to match. A perfect healing of both their soul and body. Divine soul marks, bless the souls you deem worthy. Improve their abilities while gaining them as well. Get a small portion of the benefit you provide. Grows with the person's belief in you. Plus 50-100% increase, you gain 1 to 5% of the power. Corrupt distortion, stolen from a being of pure evil, you take its ability to crush and twist the soul, and as to be expected, the body will always follow the soul. Only affects creatures with a soul. Holy soul fire, stolen from a demonic being, your power redeems it, turning the demonic fire into a holy one. Burn the very souls of your enemies. True holy soul, a chosen soul of divine nature. It emanates with holy power, strengthening the good and condemning the evil. Resist even the evilest attempts to manipulate your soul. One in mind and body, your soul has guided your mind and body to equilibrium. Raising your mental stats will partly increase your physical ones as well. 1/10 of gain. Untouchable spirit, your dedication is firm, and your path undaunted. War clerics bond, those you deem allies will be bonded to you. Cast your magic directly upon them from anywhere. So long as the connection is maintained, they are conduits for your magic. Hero's mentality, the chosen path of the hero allows you to resist the temptation of evil. Gain resistance to any effects that would manipulate the mind. Trial of advancement. Sphere of control, having claimed a territory, it is your duty to expand it. Luke wasn't really expecting a change in his status, but one did appear. It seemed like claiming the orb was a part of the trial. He wondered if everyone was able to keep track of their progress through the system, or if the orb had made it possible. He had never heard of anything like this, but most people kept their experience with the trial to themselves. It was a personal event, and one rarely shared despite the advantages it could offer. That mentality had made the information incredibly valuable, and most people would sell it for a lot. Mash's brother hadn't gone through a trial, so he hadn't had anything to add. The only information they got was from the guild, as it had acquired at least some things. It wasn't particularly valuable though. He was eager to hear of the others' trials, or rather, he was looking forward to seeing them again. Initially, he had planned on going on missions alone, but after spending so much time in a group, he realized just how frightening it was to be alone. If he made a mistake, there would be no teleporting fairy to get him out of danger. Nor any pseudo-dragons to handle anything too powerful. Sighing, he resigned himself to the trial at hand. It didn't look like there would be an easy way out, and the trial didn't seem all that bad now. Gaining the orb, he understood a little about what he needed to do now. The trial was a base defense and development mission. He would need to expand his control. He didn't quite understand how that would work, but felt like it involved using some of his skills on the ground outside. It was strange having so much knowledge thrust into his head. With classes and skills, a lot of what he gained was instinctual. He got a feeling of how things worked, but the orb had given him many more details as to the exact nature of the trial. Getting something so straightforward was relieving. He wouldn't be stuck trying to figure out what he needed to do. The biggest concern was the time limit. He didn't know exactly how long he had, but he could get a general idea by thinking about it. Right now, he knew that the trial had only just begun and that he had plenty of time still. Potentially weeks even. Some people would see the timer and rush, and he might have done the same if the others were around. However, he was alone and could only rely on himself. That was not a mistake he would make. He hoisted himself up on the pedestal, sitting comfortably where the orb had once been. While sitting down, he could easily look out of the window at the land he needed to conquer. The image of the grassy plains only lasted for a second. Then it was replaced with a dining room. One that was large enough to seat 20 people. A large wooden table at the center of the table with seats spiraling around the rectangular surface. In an instant, he was staring at the entranceway. He was looking down on it as if he were flying in the center of the room. He was about to check the next room, but something caught his attention. He saw what looked like a man standing by the entrance. His clothing was comprised of a white robe with gold lines on them. They looked a lot like his buffs did. A second later the figure turned to face him, a wide smile spread across his face. That smile might have been friendly, but it would definitely be something that haunted him in the future. The face had nothing other than a mouth, the eyes, nose, and ears just seemed like they had melted with the skin on his face. It was like staring at a layer of skin that had a mouth attached to it. Chapter 187, Castle Crawl. Red walked along the nearby walls of Ellis's castle. The castle hadn't existed the last time Red was in the city. Apparently, Ellis had decided that building a castle was more important than repairing the city. The stone was even obnoxiously painted in a strange bright yellow. Even in the dead of night, the castle stood out like a child's toy. The fact that Ellis had something like this built was ridiculous. It was repulsive to even look at. It stuck out awkwardly, as it was one of the few buildings that were obviously built after all the fighting had ended. It lacked the same wear that everything else in the city seemed to have. Over her past few days, she had explored the city and had seen the signs of a large battle. Even the edges of town had damage. The few roads that existed in the city were cracked, and there were many craters scattered across the grounds. Large sections of grass had been burned away, and the city almost completely lacked the open beauty it had possessed before. None of that made her hate this place. No, that came from the slaves she had seen. There weren't many slaves, though the few she had seen had been treated awfully. She knew most people didn't support the practice. She had seen more than a handful of beastmen help slaves in their work, or just stand up for them. Only a small number of people owned slaves, and even fewer treated them badly. The problem was that they were the most influential in the city currently. At the very least, they were well fed. The city was not having any trouble with food. That was rarely a concern for people, as many classes could create simple foods. The slaves mainly worked around the castle. There was a stone laid on the ground around the base of the building, and it was clear that Ellis was trying to build a more traditional city. It was ironic that she was trying to turn Crawl into a more human city. She had scoped the castle out over the past few days, using Tilly to learn more about normal operations in the city. Tilly was far more intelligent and capable than Red had initially assumed. She would offer her a longer-term contract. For now, she had sent Tilly away. Told her to get out of the city and wait for a letter. Red didn't think that she would fail, but she didn't want to risk Tilly's life in the gamble. Red turned to face the yellow wall. In her time scoping the castle, she had found several cracks that led deep into the wall. She could easily enter the crack and tunnel through the remaining stone. That would be loud though, and she had come up with something better. Her body slowly turned into a puddle of blood and scaled the wall following the natural lines that appeared between the bricks. She wished she had Mash's domain. The skill would let her know if there was someone nearby or watching the walls. From what she knew, the castle wasn't really protected. Ellis had received her position because of her strength, and she didn't usually have guards. Although she couldn't match the king. However, he was probably too busy dealing with the invasion. Being one of the strongest in the kingdom, he would need to be prepared in case something like the demons happened again. So, work like this fell to his subjects. In this case, that meant her family. It felt strange having her body move like a liquid, and it was doubly odd to feel like she was rubbing herself against the coarse stone. She would need to practice this more, as the sensation was horrible. Her skills functioned in strange ways, and she wondered how it would compare to Mash when he transformed. Did he get strange new senses too? What about pain? She would compare the next time they met. Although, she would probably be a bit distracted learning about everyone's advancement. Once she got to the top of the wall, she formed a small portion of blood back into her eye. She couldn't really see when her body was completely blood and had to rely on her sense of touch to figure out her relative location. Thankfully, traveling up a wall was straightforward. The eye formed, connected to her through a small stream of blood. As expected, no one was patrolling the walls at this time of night. Without reforming completely, Red relied on the single eye to guide her as she headed toward the main castle. There were several bridges that connected the walls to the castle, and it was easy to slip under a door. As she slipped inside, she reformed her body. Her clothing changed to emulate leather armor. In reality, her whole body was made of the same material as her clothing. It would offer fake weak points and let her predict where the enemy's attacks were headed. She wasn't all that worried about fighting Ellis. Ellis was powerful but had grown indulgent since conquering the city. There was a good chance she would be drunk and sleeping with a man. Completely unprepared for an attack, Red planned to take advantage of her complacency. She hadn't been able to map out the inside of the castle yet and wanted to see what she could hear. The castle emptiness worked in her favor, and noises echoed through the halls. Even hidden behind doors she could hear some noises. At first, she didn't recognize what the noises were, but then she remembered what Ellis was doing. She was more disgusted than embarrassed. Alice was using her position and power to take advantage of people, and she didn't like it. People who acted like they were taking the high road, only to collapse on their ideals once they received some real power. They were the worst kind of people. The room she was in seemed to be an unfinished bedroom. There was a bed, but no pillows or sheets. There was space for a dresser and a table, but nobody had gotten around to installing those things. Red hovered to the door, using her magic to let her body float above the ground. She didn't open it though, instead, she turned into blood and slid underneath it. With how well the sounds echoed, she didn't want to open any doors. Following the noise should be enough. She reformed her body once she was in the hallway. While fighting in her blood state was probably more effective, it was also a lot harder. She would need a lot more practice to do something like that. She moved through the air like she did when she flew. Her skill meant that she had full control of her body so long as she was willing to spend some mana. Her movement was completely silent, and she could stop other bodily functions too. The only thing that she could hear was the echoes made by Alice and her partner. The hallways were unlit, and she could see empty facets where lighting crystals could be embedded. The floors and walls looked new, but she saw that it wasn't actually being cleaned regularly. A noticeable layer of dust coated the stones. It seemed like Alice had built the castle as a symbol. There was no practical use for the building, and she didn't know how to maintain it either. Eventually, she stopped at a door hearing the noises on the other side. She took a second to center herself. Then she built a sphere of blood in her hand, growing it out. She aimed at the door, pressing her palms into it as the orb of blood exploded. It easily broke through the wooden door and sprayed needles of blood into the room. Red expected it to do some damage and was startled when a gust of wind slammed into her. Caught off guard, she hadn't braced herself for the attack at all. Her body had been solid too, and she slammed into the wall behind her. She felt her body get pressed into the wall, and her bones strained for a second. Partially turning her body to blood, the force of the impact vanished. Still shocked by the turn of events, she looked inside to see what had happened. Alice was holding a man's naked body up. She had used him to block the needles. Alice threw the man's body at Red, and she slashed through it with blood. Her attack grew to lash toward Alice. Alice rolled out of the way, and she launched another burst of wind at Red. She was prepared now, and easily braced for it. Her skin turned into armor as she hardened it. Alice spoke, rising to her feet. She was naked but didn't seem to care at all. "Who sent you?" Despite not having any of her items, Alice stood confidently. She sounded like she expected to win this battle. Even bare naked, Alice radiated an arrogance that only a fool could have. Red didn't reply to the question and surged towards. Her arms turned into a flowing river of blood as she swung them in front of her. Red just needed one attack to win this fight. Alice wasn't a healer, and she had no items on her either. She was completely vulnerable in this moment. The wind spun around her, turning violently and blocking the blood in its entirety. She seemed too casual as she walked toward Red. She kept talking too. Blood magic. Someone from the Venfer family then. The king decided to send his dogs. Wait, I can. She cut off as Red charged headfirst into the shield of wind. She continuously generated blood in front of her, while hardening her body as much as she could. The wind cut her, although an attack like that couldn't actually harm her. Breaking through the shield, blood sprayed over Alice. Even if she dodged most of it, Red felt a few drops hit their mark. Before Alice could brush them off, Red made them dig into her flesh. They only managed small cuts, but it was enough. Now, this fight was on a timer. Red would win just by preventing Alice from healing. Black dots started appearing around the wounds. Red's infection spread from the wound on Alice's arm. Unable to contain a grimace, Alice glanced at her arm. She was obviously in pain, and Red wondered how much her skill hurt. The bandits hadn't been able to move after getting struck, and she could see that even Alice was struggling with the pain. "What did you do to me?" She took deep breaths between her words and sweat started building on her forehead. It didn't last long, as Alice let out a loud scream. Red's ears felt like they exploded from the noise. It shook the whole castle, and Red stumbled to the ground as her head spun. Red could barely make out what was happening but saw a blade of wind slice through Alice's bicep. Her contaminated arm fell to the ground, and she stared at Red wickedly. Red couldn't focus, and she could use her skills. Her blood manipulation took a lot of mental focus, and she couldn't muster that. Even though she couldn't move properly, she tried rolling out of the way, as Alice struck. A blade of wind sliced into her back. There was a green aura around the wind, and the blow struck something beyond her body. It felt like the wind had singed her, and she realized that it had hit her soul. Could all beastmen hit a person's soul? All of her physical defenses couldn't do anything, and she felt the burning sensation increase as another lash of wind struck her back. Each lash seemed worse than the last, and before long it felt like her whole body had become numb from the pain. Alice started speaking, another much deeper lash landing. Red's soul stung as she tried to regain control of her mind. You will pay for that arm with your life. Even if I can't harm your body, I can do much worse. The venom in Alice's tone reached Red's ears. The situation was quickly getting worse, and Red knew that someone would have heard Alice's earlier scream. Since silence was already out the window, Red let out a scream herself. Her pain seemed to strengthen the skill as she used it. Chapter 188, Regretful Screams. Regretful screams left Red's mouth. It sounded like the calls of 1,000 dying people. It echoed in the building, though that was unnecessary. It was loud, and Red could see that Alice was bothered by the sound alone. Then the effect of the skill set in, and Alice stumbled back. Even Red felt like the skill had affected her, and her body burned as the mana was used for the skill. Hearing the wails of thousands of people coming from her own mouth had been horrifying. Alice managed to avoid falling by propping herself against a nearby wall. Red couldn't manage much, her mind was still reeling from whatever Alice had done. It had to be a sealing skill of some kind, and her use of mana had made her feel like her stomach was burning. Red had managed the scream, but it was designed to be used in desperate situations. Her other skills were still a struggle to use. Even if she couldn't manage a skill, she could still use her body a little. Red knew that she needed to do something. Her skill's effects wouldn't last forever. She simply jumped at Alice, who was suffering from the effects of her own wail. Without thinking much, Red pushed her hand into Alice's mouth. The woman instinctively bit down, and Red winced as the woman's teeth sunk into her hand. Her blood fell into Alice's mouth. Alice pushed Red away, a burst of wind spreading from the women. Red rolled across the ground. She tried to use the momentum to stand and managed it for a second. A blade of green wind cut into her face. She stepped back as her soul took the brunt of the blow. She fell to the ground as the green aura didn't dissipate. It clung to her body, and Red continued to feel her body burn. While she was focused on the pain, she barely even noticed Alice falling to the ground. The women were struggling with the pain, and Red could see tears of blood streaming from her face. Like the bandits, she seemed unable to even move. Red had managed to get the blood directly in Alice's mouth, and she doubted that Alice would cut her head off. Red tried to stand, rising to her knees. She stumbled forward, crashing into the ground next to Alice. That was all she had wanted. Now Alice was within the range of her aura of infection, and Red could see the hate in Alice's gaze. They were both struggling. Red realized that Alice's attacks had done more than just hit her soul. It had left something there, a seal or something that was preventing her from gathering herself. Red could tell that their classes were somewhat similar. However, Alice's class wasn't as fatal as hers, and that made the difference. Alice's body was failing her. Even if Red couldn't move freely, she could struggle through the pain. She needed to get out to do something. Alice was going to die in a few seconds, Red was confident of that. Now, Red needed to worry about whoever would come next. Red's skill had been even louder than Alice's skill, and others would have heard them. Red's arm was shaking, but she still moved it. She reached into the space beside her. While she couldn't wear all of her items while traveling stealthily, she had her storage space. When she was at home, she had gotten a new storage space. One that was significantly smaller, so that she could wear it for jobs like this. She reached for her mother's bracelet. The item was even more valuable than Red could have expected. The item would give her a temporary barrier. It had plenty of conditions for its use, and one of those was being near to death. Red didn't know how much damage had exactly been done to her, but she wanted to try. She couldn't see into the storage space with how she was laying, but she grabbed the bracelet and pulled it out. It was the wrong one. In her hand was the coiled wooden sculpture of Priscilla. Mash had given one to each of them so that they could find each other. Oddly, she found herself smiling. This was the fate that she deserved. Her decisions had led to this point, and she was facing the consequences. She gripped tightly around the bracelet, imagining how much better it would have been to stick with the others. She felt the rush of level UPS and knew that Alice was dead. At the very least, she had managed to do her job, and kill someone who deserved it. She could hear other noises echoing through the building, now that Ellis had stopped squirming. Their whispers told Red she didn't have much time left before their arrival. Ellis' skills showed no signs of fading either, and Red couldn't move her body properly. She just lay there, the ground pressing against the side of her face. Then she heard more fervent talking and managed to turn her head to see several soldiers crowding the entrance. They had looks of horror spread across their face, but one of the men pointed at her when she moved. All seemed completely lost for a moment, and then they exploded into motion as someone started giving out orders. What had to be a healer dropped down beside Ellis, though it was too late. Unless he had a class similar to Luke's. She hadn't considered that possibility and was relieved to see him shake his head. Another of the knights stepped toward Red, and she didn't even try to put up any resistance. It's not like she could have done much considering the state she was in. What she was surprised to see was the man pulling out a shackle. It was a slave collar, and he slapped it around her neck roughly. The metal felt cool, and she knew that she wouldn't be able to use any skills. Even still, she didn't feel like fighting back at the moment. Regret was the only thing she felt. Everything she had done since parting with her friends had been terrible. Even her time in this town. She had rushed her task stupidly and had taken the first opportunity she was given. Why had she been so careless? Did she want to die? She realized that she did. That she didn't want to face her friends again after this. For them to find out what she had done. She couldn't find the courage for something like that. Still gripping the wooden imitation in her hand, she crushed it with her last vestiges of strength. At least this way none of them would be able to find her. They would hopefully just assume that she had died on her trial. Mash P.O.V. Mash flew across the sky. After his conversation with his siblings, he learned a good bit about the situation here. More dungeons had started appearing, and they had been busy dealing with them. Even his sister had needed to actively heal the knights around some dungeons. Monsters were coming out of some of the dungeons, and the knights had to contain them while the adventurers cleared them. Furthermore, the situation was worldwide, meaning foreign kingdoms were facing similar struggles. There was a general ceasefire between the kingdoms for the duration of the invasion. His brother had gained a few levels, but nearly at the rate which Mash had. The sun had fallen, and he was flying through the night sky. He was moving quickly, far faster than he ever had before. The wyvern's wings were designed for speed. They didn't have the same durability as his dragon wings, and they were even lighter than his cat wings. They used a mix of wind and lightning magic, his energy naturally flowing into the wings. He could feel the passage of energy with his domain and was surprised by how circular the process was. Very little energy was actually used, the wings were somehow circulating the lightning mana. It was interesting to observe the process though, he had no idea how it worked. The moon lit the ground in front of him, and he watched as the forests passed below him. He had even spotted several groups of adventurers and knights fighting monsters in the woods. Whenever he saw them, he hung around in case they needed help. However, this forest didn't have any particularly dangerous monsters within it. Considering how late it was, there were a surprising amount of people outside. He guessed that most people had realized that leveling was easier now and were eager to take advantage of it. It worried him. Many people would die in vain attempts to gain a handful more levels. Mash could act like them, killing every monster he saw and trying to level rapidly, but he knew that it would come to him naturally. Especially if things kept going as they did. There were enough dangerous situations waiting for him that he didn't need to try and seek them out. His flight was cut short as he felt one of his imitations reappear. Strangely, they didn't appear in the dungeon. It wasn't that far away either. It was maybe a few minutes north of where he currently was. After speaking with Arthur, he had been asked to investigate a village to the east of where he had been. Apparently, they had requested aid after a dungeon opened nearby it. Some monsters had come out, though they had been weak. His brother was worried that something stronger would come and wanted Mash to at least check it out himself. Mash completely ignored his task when he felt the connection to his imitation. He had his map in his hand and scanned over it quickly. He couldn't tell who it was but got an idea of their location. According to the map, the only big location to his south was Crawl. That didn't make any sense, but he didn't hesitate to fly in that direction. He wasn't worried about the contract. When he used his earrings, he had noticed that the contract was nowhere to be found. It seemed like he had broken it with one of his advancements. He increased his wingspan and moved as fast as he could manage. He had a bad feeling, and he doubted that the others would have been able to break their contracts like him. The air rippled as he sped through it, and he felt his ears pop as he picked up speed. He spotted the walls of the city, then something else happened. He felt the imitation break, and his mind surged with terrible thoughts. That was the signal that someone was in serious trouble. The kind that could spell their death. He couldn't help but imagine his friends dying. Ignoring his energy concerns, he mixed his forms, the second set of wings growing beneath the current ones. Mixing his cat form and wyvern form, gave him the expected result. His speed was drastically improved, and his reflexes and sight felt better too. His speed had let him dash into the city with hardly any notice. Most people wouldn't be able to follow his movements at this point. He was different though, and his eyes could easily take in his surroundings. He noticed an obnoxious yellow castle in the distance and figured that whoever ruled here would know where he could find his friends. He doubted that they would just be walking around freely considering their level. As he flew, he felt like he hit a barrier of some kind, as if the world itself was trying to slow him down. He didn't let it and pushed on, though he couldn't make himself go any faster. It didn't matter, he cleared the distance in an instant. Even in the middle of the night, he could see from the light of the moon. The moonlight painted the ground, and he could see a group of soldiers standing outside of the castle. There was a commotion of some kind, and he noticed that they were moving out. Someone came out carrying a body. It was sickly and he could see that their skin was marred with specks. An infection? It was rare to see someone die from a disease. Although his attention snapped toward the next person they brought out. Red was dragged out, her skin a sickly grey, and he could see a trail of blood dripping from her face. She looked sick and the cut across her face looked bad. He wondered how someone could even do that to someone like Red, and why she wasn't healing it. Then he noticed the glint of metal around her neck. While he wasn't very well studied, he knew what that object was. It was a slave collar, something that was banned from use on anyone other than murderous criminals. Seeing Red, he struggled to even think. However, he was only stunned for a moment. Then he was overcome with a burst of anger. Everything else was secondary, and he dove down toward the soldiers. Chapter 189, Treant Dragon. Mash P.O.V. Draconic scales formed around his arms and legs. His two sets of wings shrunk into him. They were replaced by wooden branches. Mixing his two most powerful forms, he became an embodiment of them both. An impossible combination between a dragon and a treant. His wooden body is emblazoned with the strength and durability of a dragon. The raw stat boost alone was enormous. Scales lined his body while branches sprouted from his back. The scales mixed with the wood as they sprouted across his face. His pure strength was raised to an unbelievable degree, and he could feel how his body had changed. All over his body, he could feel that he was like the treant. However, he carried a speed and strength that was even greater than what he gained from the dragon form. Its impenetrable black scales acted as an armor to protect normally vulnerable wood. He practically used all of his remaining energy in the transformation alone. It didn't matter to him. He didn't care if he collapsed, he just needed to save Red. Hunt triggered, and he sped even faster as he aimed for the man holding Red. His restraint broke as he struck the man. Red P.O.V. Red felt her skin brush against the ground as she was dragged like garbage out of the castle. Her captor had a handful of her hair in his hand and was pulling her roughly. Something like that wouldn't hurt someone with her stats, but it was still uncomfortable. The night air had a gentle wind to it, and it made her wounds sting when it blew into her. The cut across her face was especially bad, though it wasn't fatal. It just hurt. She knew that there was nothing left for her. No way out. These people would execute her, and probably torture her before doing it. She had killed their king, even if many did not agree with Ellis's rulership. This would be the second time that someone had assassinated a beastman king. Not to mention, it was her family that had done it both times. She felt oddly ready for it. A sense of relief washed over her. Her thoughts weren't for her family, not even her loving mother. What thoughts she could muster were dedicated to her friends. Her mind was still recovering Ellis's scream, and she couldn't help but feel a little jealous of the skill. The thought didn't last long, as her mind shifted to the past year. It wasn't like she had spent a lot of time with the group, but it had been meaningful. They were the first people that didn't demand anything of her. She hadn't realized how much a single connection like that could matter, and she was able to form multiple in such a short time. Her family would see her friendship as a sign of weakness and tell her that she shouldn't trust people that she had only known for a year. Now, she realized that it was the opposite. Those people were the ones she should have trusted. She shouldn't have done what her family did and taken the trial instead. She should have at least told the others about what she had been planning. It was too late now, and she would die without ever being able to tell the truth to the people that deserved to hear it. As she was being dragged across the stone, she heard something. It sounded like a storm, and she tried to glance upwards. She saw something descending, though she didn't know how to describe it. It seemed like a nightmare made manifest. A creature covered in black scales with arms that were more beast-like than human. Long clawed hands and feet and wings that looked more like bones. The light of the moon behind the figure seemed to reflect the glow of his eyes. The white shapes within them identified the monster. It was Mash. He slammed into the person who had been dragging her, landing and shaking the earth as if he were an enormous beast. The man had been unprepared and was killed instantly. His body crushed beneath Mash's fist as he slammed it into the ground. It seemed like he was trying to hurt the world itself. Without turning his head in the slightest, the bones on his back shot towards the other knights. Red noticed that they were wood now. His whole body was slightly different, and he didn't look human in the slightest. His expression was stiff as a puppet, and all she could see on it was anger. The way his eyes were tilted and the stiffness, told her just how angry he was. The soldiers stood almost no chance against Mash's surprise attack. Dozens of them got injured as the branches grew out. It was as if a bush was growing by killing the people. He still didn't turn his head from the one he had crushed. His anger seemed focused on that man. Red wondered if he had lost his mind, and tried to speak. Her throat felt surprisingly bad, and it came out rougher than she intended. Mash! Stop! She hadn't spoken very loudly, but it seemed to be enough. The branches of wood changed, and they slammed into the ground and spread up and around them. The speed of his creations was incredible, and she couldn't help but be in awe of his talent. His control over creation was astounding. Walls formed up around them, and he turned to face her. His expression was still stuck in anger, and she couldn't help but feel a little scared as he reached for her. She couldn't move or resist the collar though. His hand changed as it reached her, shrinking back to its normal size. His fingers landed on the collar, and she heard the metal snap. She had regained some of her powers but still felt limited by Ellis's skills. We need to get out of here now. What Mash did next was not something she expected. He tore apart the very air, something forming in the space behind him. Wood grew from the ground forming an archway of sorts and she stared at it in confusion. The process took about a minute, and she wondered why none of the soldiers outside were attacking. Then she thought about it from the soldiers' perspective. A monster, one who was terrifyingly strong, was attacking. It killed a few people instantaneously, then formed a shell around itself. They would be busy trying to figure out how to best deal with the situation themselves. Honestly, they might even be assuming that the monster was in the process of evolving or something. An evacuation of the city might even start. Mash has finished making his thing, and she realized it was a dungeon portal. Let's go. His voice was deep and hollow as if it was speaking through a long tube. He didn't sound angry anymore though his expression was still unchanged. She couldn't tell if he was mad or not, and that bothered her more than the strange situation. Still, she trusted him enough to enter the mysterious portal with him. The other side made the situation even more confusing. Mash P.O.V. He was worried about Red and needed to get her somewhere safe. Her skin was grey, and it looked like she was infected by something bad. He would need Luke, but how could he get him? His sister could probably help too, but he would need to treat her other injuries first. The cur on her face was bad, and he noticed what looked like whip marks on her back as she led her inside. His anger was dispersing quickly and worry, and fear set in heavily. Thankfully he was able to focus on Red, and not what had just happened. He had lost himself a few moments ago. Rather it felt like having so many transformations active had influenced his mind as well. His emotions had gotten the better of him, and he wondered if his skills were surpassing his equipment at this point. While his earrings were good, he didn't think they could oppress something like the effects of a level 100 skill. He would need to learn more about how his transformations would affect his mental state. What happened, are you? His voice trailed off as he saw what she did. This had been the portal to his own dungeon, and this was the first time he had actually seen it. It was enormous, far bigger than he could have imagined. It seemed like an actual world, and it was somewhat similar to what he saw when he used the earrings. An enormous tree stood before him. It was covered in a blackish wood and reached far into the clouds above. They couldn't see the top but could see the shadow it cast. The treetop seemed larger than several cities put together, its shadow casting the clouds beneath it in darkness. They were far away from it, but it still seemed large. It was kind of cold where they stood, and the occasional breeze only made it worse. The shade the tree cast probably chilled the ground significantly. The urge to explore was strong, but he contained it as he heard Red start to speak. "Mash, where did you take us?" Mash was about to reply when he felt the effects of hunt end. His body went limp, and the transformations faded as he fell to the ground. Much to his shame, Red immediately threw a cloth over him. Thankfully the portal behind him had closed with his collapse. It would be bad if others could enter. He turned his head to face her. His attention was drawn back to his biggest concern. "Are you okay?" Mash had to ask, although he should have expected the response. "That is a stupid question. We can talk later. More importantly, where are we? Is it safe here?" He felt surprisingly happy about being chastised. It was familiar. Red was always the one to focus on what needed to be done. She rarely got distracted from the main task and had moved to the most immediate concern in her mind. He was tempted to reiterate his question but didn't want to mindlessly talk in circles. He answered Red to the best of his knowledge. "It should be safe, it's my dungeon or world, I guess." The discussion shifted a little as Mash explained his abilities and where they actually were at the moment. While he couldn't be certain of their safety, he didn't see any creatures around and didn't think that there were any creatures here. He wondered if he would need to populate it himself. That could be a fun project, though it wasn't an urgent task. He told Red of his unique skill, and how it worked. If they weren't inside of a dungeon already, he doubted that she would understand what that meant. He wondered if this made him a world owner. He didn't think so, especially since he lacked the power of one. Red seemed to agree with that conclusion. The conversation about his abilities naturally flowed to Red's, though she seemed weirdly hesitant about talking. Her eyes fell downward, her brows creased slightly. Mash had an idea why too. "Why were you in Crawl? I think I deserve to know that much." Mash didn't like pressuring Red for an answer, but he couldn't ignore it. Considering what he had just done to save her, he wanted to know why. What had she done to lead to such a ridiculous situation? Even though he felt bad, he didn't let up in the slightest. His eyes bore into her as he waited for the response. Staring at her closely, he saw just how hurt Red actually looked. Her injuries were slowly healing now, and he guessed that whatever had prevented it was vanishing now. It wasn't the physical pain that he noticed though. Oddly, it felt like he was able to understand a little of her emotions too. He could see that she was afraid of something, and from the situation, he thought it was of him. Then he recognized the look she had and remembered something from his own past. "Red? What happened? Are you doing all right?" Chapter 190, Shame. Mash saw the look on Red's face and understood. It was shame, and the kind that could only come from betraying someone you truly trusted. He had worn that same expression once before. The look of utter despair as you gazed at someone who you knew would hate what you had done. He remembered seeing his sister and knowing that he had fundamentally done something wrong. That he couldn't go back and change things. That his sister would forever remember that moment. Even now, he avoided telling her of his fights with other people for that reason. He couldn't face the looks again. It had been back when he was a child, soon after he had received his first class. Back then he had been desperate in his attempt to raise his stats. He followed his brother's workout and did extra on top of it. He couldn't even remember how old he was when it happened, but he knew that he had raised his stats significantly. It was after the imprisonment but before his sister had left. That was all he really remembered from that time. When he tried to think about his childhood, he found that it was hard to place events. He had spent so much of his time raising stats and training that the years blended together. Mash in the past. Mash was training at the park. It had become a routine of his and one that he did constantly. The park he was at was near his house, and he enjoyed spending his time there. People rarely walked by, so he was able to train out of sight of everyone. He could even practice with a wooden stick so long as he hid it from his parents. After the incident, they had stopped him from ever holding anything that could be perceived as a weapon. So, Mash had found this place. It was hidden behind some large bushes in a much more public park. The ground here was made of the same stone as the roads, and it could barely fit 3 people, but it was enough for him. There was enough space for him to do almost all the exercises his brother had written down. He did just that, training as often as he could. His parents didn't mind most exercises, but they had been furious when tried to train with a stick. It wasn't a proper weapon, but that didn't seem to matter to them or anyone else for that matter. That only made him want to do it more. He was angry and wanted to get back at everyone that had imprisoned him. All he had done was fight back, and he didn't deserve to be treated unfairly. Honestly, Mash didn't really feel bad for the boy. He understood that what he did was wrong, though that was mostly because of his sister's insistence. Jonas had been as much to blame as he was. He could have just as easily been the one to die, but no one seemed to care about that fact. Mash hadn't even wanted to fight, he had been content training by himself. Just like now, all he wanted to do was train. It was fun and felt better than playing as the other kids did. Tucked in between two buildings, he smacked his stick against the nearby wall. It made a subdued clacking noise, as the stick strained against the stone. At first, he had been worried that someone inside would be able to hear him, but he had learned that these buildings were abandoned. He could use the space freely now, and he practiced his strikes against the stone wall. This stick wasn't as big or sturdy as he would have liked, but it bent comfortably around his hands. It worked well enough as an imitation staff. He heard a few noises, and before he could react, two people charged through the bush. Both were boys, and one slammed into him. His shoulder pressed into Mash's chest. Mash was pushed roughly into the building's wall. He winced as his elbow struck the stone awkwardly. His hand loosened on the staff, and it fell to the ground. Mash instinctively tried to hold on, but his hand shook as his arm felt numb for a second. Some tears formed in his eyes, and he used his opposite arm to wipe them away. The two men before were at least a year older than him, and they looked like knights in training. One of them had a wooden sword at his waist, while the other had an imitation spear strapped to his back. The blade had been replaced by a plank of wood. Mash's eyes lingered on the weapons, a spike of jealousy rushing him. He wanted one but knew that his parents wouldn't allow for it. "Look, he's crying." The boy sounded arrogant, and he recognized him as one of the people who had been with Jason back then. These were his friends. Mash didn't know what to do. He could scream, but then he would get in trouble with his parents. His little alcove made it so that he couldn't run either. With how it was designed, he was essentially in a small corner that was normally hidden behind the bushes. Two buildings' edges met behind him and trapped him with the two older boys. Mash still found himself snapping back. "Says the coward. You guys are just acting like bullies." Mash was distracted by the pain, and his words sounded a little forced. They were, and he didn't think that his insults were particularly effective. They still felt good to say, though that only lasted for a moment as the nearest boy drew his sword and swung it in one motion. The speed of the strike made him think it was a skill. Knight typically got a basic skill like strike or block. It seemed like this boy had gotten lucky. The blade struck Mash's thigh and he fell to one leg. His knee hit the stone floor roughly, and he wished he had practiced in the park instead. Ouch! His yelp was more humiliating than he expected it to be. He clenched his teeth in frustration, but the stupid sound had already escaped his lips. To hide his embarrassment, he jumped at the boy with the wooden sword. While the kid was faster with his skill, Mash had higher stats than the kid. He had been gaining stats quickly with all of his training, and he knew that the knights train less than he did. Mash wasn't able to jump as fast as he wanted, his thigh hurt when he tried to move. However, he still landed his blow and tackled the kid. His elbow dug into his side, and Mash heard something crunch. He winced from the noise, but it was drowned out as the other boy screamed. The kid fell over and coughed up some blood. Mash hadn't expected his attack to be so strong and wasn't sure what he should do now. The hesitation let the other boy swing his spear into the back of Mash's head. At first, Mash didn't realize what had happened. Then he felt the pain and stumbled forward as he felt dizzy. It made him angry that they were ganging up on him like that. Managing to get his leg under him, he stopped his fall and turned around. Seeing the spear coming for him again, he grabbed it. The wooden blade cut his skin a little but didn't do much else. He pulled, dragging the boy forward, and Mash slammed his elbow into the kid's skull. He fell to the ground like a dropped doll. Mash turned to the other boy who was screaming as he stared at his blood-mixed vomit. Mash stepped toward him and was about to kick him when he heard some rustling in the bush. Mash! Luna walked through, her eyes scanning everything with concern. Then it shifted to something else. It was fear and disappointment, something he never wanted to see. She started crying, her words coming out as incoherent mumbles. Not knowing what to do, Mash ran. He ran right past his sister, and just kept going. He couldn't face her, not after what he had just done. So, he ran desperately to get away, to not have to speak or apologize. Present. Mash looked at Red, and somehow knew what she was thinking. He didn't know what was happening, but he was reminded of his own shame for some reason. Something is affecting your mind. Priscilla's message helped him regain his focus, and he thanked her. He needed to figure out what was happening. What was affecting his mind? He focused on what he was getting from his domain and realized that Red was emitting some mana from her body. More than normal. All people had some mana that surrounded their bodies, but what surrounded Red felt more substantial now. Was she using a skill on him? Red, what class did you get? Red, who looked to be debating something, finally seemed to break. She fell to the ground across for him. She spoke quickly with more emotion than he had ever heard from her. Some tears streaked from her face, though they were made of blood. He also noticed that she had a tattoo under her left eye that very much resembled a streak of bloody tears. He didn't say anything as she spoke. He just listened, her story growing more outrageous by the moment. When she finished, they just sat in silence for a while. Mash processing what she had said. She had started by explaining her class and what it did. He was surprised to hear of her own hatred and disgust with the class. With the way she spoke, he wondered why she hadn't picked another. He didn't ask though, thinking that would be a bad idea. Hearing the talk of her class was interesting, and he realized that her aura was probably what dug up his bad memories. He would need to be careful with his thoughts around Red. It sounded like her friends would be affected by her mood just as much as her enemies. While he would normally be very interested in hearing about her class, his mind was more focused on what had come after. Her explanation of recent events and what had led her here. Mash didn't know how to respond to that and just stared at her in silence for a while. Mash, please, I need to hear a response. I won't argue if you don't want to be on a team anymore. I doubt the others would be willing to trust me once they learn of the truth. We barely know each other, and you guys have no reason. Mash didn't let her keep going. He knew what it felt like to talk yourself into despair. Plus, she was thinking about the situation too logically for her own good. In the first place, he never really acted with logic. She was his friend, and for better or worse, he would help her. Stop. We are close. All four of us, even if it doesn't make much sense, it's the truth. Can you honestly tell me that you expected Jill or Luke or me to abandon you for this? Red seemed taken aback by his outburst. Mash didn't care and just kept going, saying everything he wanted to. He was angry, both at Red for not telling them anything and because of her family. Mash had an idea of what his life would have been like without his siblings, and he knew how much his parents would have been able to change him. It wasn't something he could just ignore. It was obvious that they had raised Red without any concern for her own thoughts or beliefs. They never even gave her the chance to form those. He spoke his mind without even trying to think through them. If Luke came back as a lich or Jill with some other blasphemous class, I wouldn't care. I mean that I would still be their teammates regardless. You would too. So just deal with it or let us deal with it. You are the only one that has to decide if you want to stay or not, because I'm sure the rest of us want you to. You made a mistake, and so did I. Mash felt different images flash through his mind. The image of him running from Luna. The other things he had done back then. The pettiness with which he acted. Being around Red was affecting him more than he would like to admit. Even being aware of the aura didn't help him much, and he realized that his items probably weren't good enough to stop something from someone at her level. He knew logically that most items became more useless as someone leveled, but this was the first time he was experiencing it firsthand. He ended the conversation, wanting to distract himself, as his most recent actions came up. The beastmen he had killed, in what he now knew as misguided rage. Being mad at them for putting the collar on Red was one thing, but killing so many of them wasn't justice. I'm going to meditate. Let's figure out the rest after. As Mash closed his eyes to meditate, he saw Red mouth the words thank you. He had said all that he wanted and didn't give her the opportunity to respond. It was somewhat embarrassing to speak so candidly, and he still needed to process his own thoughts too. It seemed like he would be having some trouble sleeping in the near future.